Hey listener, welcome back to another Out of This World story with Revenge Tales. Statutory warning. This video's all places, characters, stories used in this story are completely fictitious and brainchild. Built for entertainment purposes only. No person, caste, ethnic group, institution, racism is written. Any correspondence between the characters, story of the story and the reality is complete. Authors and channel authorities will not be responsible in any way for such similarities. Let's go today's story. Story 1. I never thought I'd be here writing about what happened to me 2 years ago with my wayward wife. It sounds like one of those TV shows that only happens to other people, you know. But maybe it happens more often than we think, and people just don't talk about it. I was too ashamed to tell anyone about the fallout at the time. But she left me with no choice. I had to expose her on Facebook. Let me give you some context to my story. We met at a park where I was working a part-time gig walking people's dogs for money. I'll never forget that day we met. As our paths crossed, our eyes met. She was jogging and I was walking a dog. I greeted her and she stopped, taking off her headphones. I didn't want to seem awkward, so I complimented her on how cute she looked. She thanked me and we started chatting. She mentioned that she was trying to lose weight, and I reassured her that she looked great. She blushed and couldn't stop smiling. As our conversation continued, we talked about the dog I was walking, a friendly golden retriever. She then shared that she had recently lost her beloved Pomeranian and wished to get a larger dog breed, such as a golden retriever, so she could take it out for a walk or run. She mentioned that she had just started running recently and seemed a bit insecure about her weight, although to me she looked stunning with her nice long hair and big chest, just my type. At the time, she was 24 and I was 26. Our conversation lasted about 30 minutes, and as we parted ways, I walked her to her car, we exchanged numbers, and made plans to meet again the following day. Allow me to share a bit about my background, as I believe it is relevant to my story. I moved to the United States from El Salvador when I was 19 years old. While my English may not be perfect, I speak and write fluently, thanks to my mother, who was an English teacher back in El Salvador. On the other hand, she was born here in the US, but her parents are from Mexico. She has beautiful black hair, tan skin, and a typical attractive Mexican look, similar to that of Galamontes. As for me, I resemble the soccer player Rodolfo Zelaya. The following week, we met up at a bar and got to know each other more. During our conversation, she revealed that she had recently ended a relationship and wanted to take things slow. I honored her decision and waited patiently because I was head over heels in love. But after 2 months of dating, all I got was a peck on the lips and she refused to be intimate with me. My patience was wearing thin, and when I asked her why she said she needed a commitment, I offered to make things official and asked her to be my girlfriend. But she said that wasn't enough for her because she wasn't getting any younger. It's been 3 months since we started dating and things were getting serious between us. We've started having closeness, but she kept pressuring me for something more. I wanted to marry her, too, but I needed to get my finances straight first. You see, my job as a construction worker was tough, with long hours, and I had to support my parents and siblings in El Salvador. I came to this country illegally, but I spent 6 years working on my immigration status. Now I was trying to settle down. But I didn't have enough money to afford the expensive wedding and engagement rings that she wanted. Looking back, I should have seen the red flag waving high above her head. She always had this air of superiority, like she was better than me because she was born in the US, had a fancy college degree, and ran with the elite crowd. She never said it outright, but I could feel the condescension in her tone, as if she believed she was above my station in life. I should have picked up on this earlier, but I was too blinded by love and her stunning looks. It's not like I needed her to secure my immigration status since I already had my green card. In my mind, I thought that marrying an American girl would elevate my status among my peers. Tears. My English wasn't the best at the time, and hers was perfect. So I saw it as a chance to practice with a native speaker. I also wanted to experience the American lifestyle, which can only be fully experienced by immersing oneself in American culture. Mentally, I saw my girlfriend as above me and put her on a pedestal, essentially demoting myself, which was a huge mistake. After working long hours, sometimes up to 16 hours a day, I saved up enough money to buy an engagement ring that cost $4,000. She dropped hints about her expectations, and I knew anything less wouldn't be good enough for her. I took my girlfriend to a fancy restaurant, even though I could hardly afford it, and popped the question. She was ecstatic, happier than I had ever seen her before. It was a beautiful moment, but as I watched her admire the expensive engagement ring I had bought her, I couldn't help but wonder how much the material object meant to her. I know some people see the ring as a symbol of love and commitment, but it felt like my fiancé was obsessing over it, like Gollum with the ring in Lord of the Rings. I started to feel like our relationship was based on the ring and other material things, rather than true love and commitment. Looking back, I should have realized this then, but my infatuation with her beauty and the illusion of love blinded me. I had been seeing this woman for 4 months and we were already engaged to be married. Until that point, she had never invited me to meet her parents or attend any family events with her, but after I proposed, she finally invited me to meet her family the following weekend. Her parents were a down-to-earth traditional Mexican couple who were devout Catholics. She had 1 brother and 2 sisters, and she was the youngest daughter. All of her siblings had gone to college, and they spoke English with each other, but spoke Spanish with their parents. As I sat there, observing them, I couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia because I hadn't experienced that kind of family love and togetherness in so long. The night was pleasant. Her parents seemed to really like me, but her siblings were distant and dismissive. I couldn't shake the feeling that they saw me as beneath them, but I reasoned that it was probably because they were born and raised in America. However, during the meeting, I couldn't help but notice that my fiancé kept showing off the ring, like he was the real star of the show, and I was just an afterthought. It made me feel foolish standing there with a goofy grin on my face, like I was just the guy who donated the ring. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and seeing her gazing at the ring, and in that moment it should have been clear to me that something was wrong. But at the time, I was blinded by the happiness of seeing her so delighted with my gift. She always praised my taste, and I was pleased that I could provide her with something she valued so highly. Our bed life was pathetic, to say the least. If I was lucky, we would be close maybe twice a week, but I always had to beg her for it. It was as if she was doing me a favor, and I found myself begging for affection like a pathetic supplicant. I was always trying to impress her, to gain her favor, and it became a daily routine to do all the household chores after my grueling 13-16-hour work shifts. What was strange was that the more she rejected my efforts, the harder I tried to please her. Looking back, I can see how I had become a complete doormat. 3 weeks had passed and I had just returned from work when she dropped the bomb on me. She was pregnant. She explained that her body had been behaving oddly, and she had missed her period. So she took a pregnancy test which confirmed her suspicions. Initially, I was ecstatic, overjoyed beyond belief. I couldn't wait to tell my family back home in El Salvador. I called my parents and siblings to share the good news and informed them that we would visit them when the baby was born. But my fiancée wasn't as thrilled as I was. She was worried because we weren't married yet, and it had always been her dream to be married before having children. She guilt-tripped me, saying that it would be humiliating for her to be pregnant and unmarried and that her friends and family would look down on her. I promised her that I would bust my hump at work so that we could have a spectacular wedding. She was eager to tie the knot at SAP, worried that her growing belly would make her bridal gown look less than perfect. We compromised and decided on a scaled-down wedding to save on costs, agreeing that it would take place in 2 months. After that, I was working like a dog, putting in 16-hour days to make up the financial difference. My fiancée was salaried, so she couldn't contribute more than what she was already earning. But I didn't mind the grind, as long as we could make our special day a dream come true. However, little did I know that this wedding was just the beginning of the nightmare that awaited me. I was barely able to get any sleep, but the prospect of becoming a father soon gave me a sense of assurance and happiness. I thought life couldn't have been any better than it was at that moment. However, things started to go awry in our relationship as my wife stopped performing any household chores. I ended up doing everything: cooking, cleaning, and working 16-hour shifts. I even prepared her lunch for work, but she always insisted on having 2 lunches because she claimed to bring one for a co-worker. I couldn't understand why nobody ever brought her lunch in return, but she said that my cooking was the best and she'd rather have my lunch than anyone else's. It didn't make much sense to me, but I brushed it off as a minor issue. The next week, my wife invited me to her work event on a Friday evening, which was a gathering at a bar. She's a marketing coordinator at an advertising company. I had to leave work early to make it there by 5 p.m. She was very particular about my outfit and even picked it out for me, which I thought was just her being thoughtful, but looking back, it seemed like she wanted me to impress her snobbish colleagues. It should have been a warning sign, but I didn't realize it at the time. As we arrived at the bar around 5:30 p.m., I couldn't help but notice the stuffy atmosphere. My fiancée had invited me to a work gathering with her colleagues. She works as a marketing coordinator at an advertising company. She introduced me to the 23 people present, some of whom brought their spouses as well, although she only works directly with about 5 of them. They all seemed so uptight. I felt out of place there, being just a simple construction worker, while they all appeared to work in fancy air-conditioned offices with college degrees. The attention was on my fiancé's engagement ring, which every girl there seemed interested in. To my surprise, they all thought that I owned a construction company, but I wondered who had given them that impression. I felt like a fish out of water, struggling to keep up with the pretentious atmosphere, but I noticed something peculiar among the guests. Everyone was putting on a facade, trying too hard to appear sophisticated. After my fiancé left to socialize, I found myself alone at the bar. That's when a young man approached me, probably around 22 years old. We had already exchanged pleasantries during the introductions, but this time he took a keen interest in my accent. He asked if I was from El Salvador, and I confirmed his suspicions. He then revealed that his parents were from there too, and we both laughed about the quirks of Salvadoran culture. It was a relief to have someone to talk to and be myself around in a sea of phonies. As we chatted, the young man mentioned that his parents were from the same area in El Salvador as I was, and I realized that I actually knew his family. In fact, I knew some of his extended family members more than he did. He told me that his uncle recently passed in a gang-related incident, and I'd also heard about it from people back home. He mentioned that he wanted to travel to El Salvador for the funeral. As we talked, it felt like we were two long-lost amigos finally catching up. After an hour, we somehow landed on the topic of my soon-to-be wife and his work. He asked when I planned to tie the knot, and I mentioned it about 2 months. Then he asked how long I'd been with my fiancé, and I told him almost 5 months. Suddenly, his demeanor shifted, and he looked worried. He paused for a moment, and then said he needed to tell me something, but I couldn't let her know it was from him. He emphasized that he was only telling me because we were like brothers. As we talked, I felt a bond growing between us, like we were long-lost brothers. Our conversation shifted towards my wife and his work. He asked me when I was getting married, and I mentioned the plan to do it in 2 months. When he learned I had only known my fiancé for almost 5 months, he seemed to be worried. After a moment of silence, he revealed something that shook me to the core. He said he had something to tell me about my wife, but he didn't want her to know that he had told me. He justified it by saying that I was like a brother to him. He motioned for me to look over at a group of guys, telling me he worked with them, and had a gut feeling that the blonde dude was hooking up with my fiancé. I was taken aback, feeling a mix of shock and embarrassment, but I tried to keep my cool, even though I felt like a phony playing the tough guy from El Salvador in my fancy blue blazer. This guy I barely knew was dropping a bombshell on me that his co-worker was sleeping with my future wife. Despite the gravity of the situation, I managed to stay composed and just listened intently. With a concerned look on his face, he whispered to me that my wife has been frequently visiting his department without any valid reason. When I asked him how long this has been going on, he hesitantly replied that it has been going on for about a year, but he was unsure of the exact duration. He went on to explain that the guy she was spending time with is a well-known ladies' man who was friendly with all the ladies in the company, most of whom were already in relationships with other men. He told me that his workplace was like a frat house, where young people are running through all the married women like it's a norm, and most of the guys are in competition to see who can hook up with more female co-workers. He added that what made my wife stand out was her interest in this guy and her lack of discretion, doing things like bringing him lunch, trying to hold his hand, and even flirting with him in public. I was shocked and confused. I couldn't believe my wife was doing all this while I was working hard for us. It dawned on me that perhaps the reason she always asked me to make 2 lunches was to feed this guy, too. My work colleagues used to poke fun at me for packing my wife's lunch, but little did they know that I was also preparing a meal for her possible side piece. It's funny how things work out. The guy I just met told me not to panic or rat him out, because if my wife finds out that he spilled the beans, he might lose his job in a snap. He warned me that it's like a college frat party at their workplace, and if I go telling tales, people could easily gang up against him. As someone who's been in a gang, I know what he means. I couldn't thank him enough for shedding light on the situation. As I listened to my new acquaintance spill the beans about my wife's infidelity, I decided to keep the fact that she was pregnant to myself. I didn't want to complicate things further or risk him holding back more information if he found out. I signaled the bartender for more shots, but my new friend advised me to stop drinking as it might cloud my judgment. He understood the gravity of the situation and advised me to take some time to think things through. Sitting there, I couldn't stop staring at the guy my wife might be sleeping with. Every muscle in my body was tense, and I had to resist the urge to walk over there and rip his head off, but my compatriot advised me not to drink too much, and I listened. I stayed silent and sober, taking the time to digest what I'd learned. He reassured me that he knew I needed space, and that he was going to join his friends. We exchanged numbers before he wandered off into the crowd. I couldn't shake the feeling that meeting my fellow Salvadoran at the party was no coincidence. It was a destiny that brought us together to reveal the truth about my wife's possible infidelity. It's moments like these that reaffirm my faith in God, because I don't believe in chance encounters. Throughout my life, from my humble beginnings to chasing in the American dream, there have always been people who guided me along the way. I trust that God won't put me in a situation I can't handle. I've been thought through tougher challenges than this, and I know I'll come out on top. When we finally arrived home that day, my mind was racing with thoughts about what my countrymen had told me. It was only made worse by the fact that during the gathering, my wife couldn't seem to take her eyes off the guy my countryman had mentioned. I couldn't help but wonder if my countryman was right, or if my mind was just playing tricks on me. On our way back home, my wife noticed that I was quieter than usual and asked me what was wrong. I told her that during the gathering she hadn't checked on me once, and it was as if I didn't even exist to her. As we drove home, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had settled in me after my countryman's bombshell. To add fuel to the fire, I noticed that my wife kept glancing in the direction of the guy he had mentioned. Maybe it was just my imagination, but it seemed like there was something going on between them. When she asked me why I was so quiet, I deflected, telling her that she hadn't checked on me all night. She apologized, saying that she had been caught up in conversations with her co-workers. She then asked me what my countrymen and I had talked about, and I told her that we discussed our home country. I couldn't bring myself to confront her about the accusation, not wanting to out my countrymen. I didn't want to accuse her directly, so I decided to bring it up in a roundabout way. I said, "Oh, by the way, I noticed that you were looking at one of your colleagues at work a lot. What's going on there?" She replied that he was just a work friend and they had to collaborate on various projects, but I knew that couldn't be true because my countrymen had told me they didn't work in the same department. She lied to my face, plain and simple. Since that day, I began to have doubts about marrying my fiancé. Even though my countryman didn't confirm that the guy at her workplace was sleeping with her, his suspicion of their close relationship made me second-guess everything. I don't want to end the relationship just on suspicion alone. I need solid evidence before making any decisions. Despite the lack of concrete proof, I can't shake the feeling that my countryman was telling the truth. After all, what did he have to lose by telling me? I need to get to the bottom of this before taking any drastic action. I couldn't shake off the feeling that my countryman's suspicion about my wife's affair was true. Why would he risk his job to lie to me? I asked myself. It's not the kind of thing you just make up to another man. The next day I decided to send a message to my wife by not making her lunch before I left for work, and for 3 days in a row I stopped doing some of her chores. When she confronted me about it, I told her that my co-workers' wives make their lunches for them, and that she should be making mine too, not the other way around. Her response was infuriating. She angrily retorted that my co-workers' wives are slaves and that they are old school, and then she had the audacity to ask me if I see myself as a slave. I told her that I needed a wife who could fulfill traditional roles, including helping out around the house. That's when she got upset, took off the ring and hurled it back at me. She claimed that she was doing me a favor by even considering marrying me. In response, I angrily told her to get lost and that I didn't need her for anything. She threatened to take me to court for child support and to have me deported.